Hello. Today we will be discussing probably one of the hardest things for the human mind to grasp, which is the infinite and eternal void. So, the first thing to know about this is that it isn't actually a void as you may think of one. It's not an astronomical void, meaning it's not the kind of void that you look at space and you see an area without stars or light, and scientists call that a void. That is not the kind of quote unquote void that we are talking about. It is called the void because you cannot see, feel, or perceive anything at all if you were to be placed quote unquote inside of it, even though we're all inside of it. But my point is, you as a conscious entity, by nature of how the void exists, will always appear as nothingness to you. But if you understand that it is not emptiness and actually the potential for everything that could ever happen, and the potential for everything that ever has happened, then you start to see why it isn't really empty. It's just not currently manifest. So, in this way, the void is filled with everything that could ever be, but it's just not filled with anything in particular. So, therefore, it looks like nothing. And because it's infinitely everything, that allows infinite combinations to occur within it. And when you have genuine infinity combining infinitely random things forever and ever, eventually, as I stated in the Singularity Codex, different laws, or we can call them laws, but basically different variables will fall into place in this randomness that allow energy to exist in a new format. So, our Big Bang, for instance, since we are more familiar with our universe than any other, started off as an explosion of raw energy. And we can look back through space time and see this. And we can see that as the energy left its original source, it kind of hardened, it kind of cooled off. And that turned into various kinds of dust and elements and different things combined. And then those reactions created new elements, which then allowed new kinds of existence to take place. And all of this is happening because in the infinite void, these particular laws of physics that we experience in our reality collapsed into one position from the infinite superposition. So, when I talk about a superposition, if you are at all familiar with quantum mechanics, you've heard of that term before. But if you haven't, a superposition is the what exists as a potential decision. So, I don't actually, I hate to use pop culture references, but if any of you have seen, I think it's Infinity War. It's one of I think, yeah, it is Infinity War, um, where Doctor Strange is looking at the time stone and he's looking at all the different potential outcomes that could happen. Well, that is kind of like a superposition. It's all the outcomes, and then he saw which one needed to collapse into place in order for them to defeat Thanos and quote unquote save the galaxy. So when you have the infinite void that is truly everything, in its raw state, there's too much chaos competing with itself for anything to actually exist, which is why it doesn't. But eventually, these combinations come together in a way that create physical laws that can stand against this chaos and allow a new form, as I said, of light and energy to exist, which then usually over time will end up as a new kind of reality like ours. So, um, I don't particularly think that there was a being that made us, like some religious texts say. But I do know that in the grand scheme of reality, there have probably been conscious beings that collapse into existence by chance from the void who are kind of primordial beings. So, they didn't really evolve in the traditional sense, or maybe they did. Maybe laws collapse into place to allow almost like a body of some kind of being to form, obviously not a carbon based being, but a different kind of consciousness, a different kind of thing to form, which eventually had conscious thought arise within it, kind of woke up, you know, perceived. I have no idea. We don't have a way of knowing how these beings would be or would come into existence. But I do believe that when we talk about some of these forces of reality, when I talk about the mother, when I talk about the daughter, the son, these are primordial forces of consciousness that have arisen from the void that understand the big picture. So it's like the mother is the thinking of everything. So it stems from the void. It's like the thoughts of the void. And it's very complicated. I don't necessarily think it functions as you would imagine a human brain to function, but it certainly does feel and it certainly does want, because it does exist as a conscious accumulation of itself. So its nature, in a way, being infinite, limits what it can and can't do, because if it were to on its own start collapsing its own, what I want this to be collapsed into reality for myself, well, it would cease to be an infinite being, and that can't be possible, or else it just wouldn't be what it is, and it is what it is. It's the eternal void, the ultimate quantum superposition, the place from which everything comes and to which everything returns. If you have studied Taoism at all or read the Tao Te Ching, it talks about the Tao, and it does sometimes call it the Great Mother, and it talks about how it gives to everything, it pervades through everything. You can't know it, but you can be it at one with yourself. Now that could be a whole other conversation we can have later, but the very opening lines of the Tao Te Ching are this: the name that can be named is not the eternal name. And to me, that has to be talking about the void. The void is the mother, the void mother of everything. It is nameless because nothing named it. It was there before anything it could ever possibly exist. And it births everything. And so a child doesn't name their parent. They might call it something, just like how we have to make up names for everything, or else how do we know what we're referring to? But in and of its true self, it doesn't consider itself to have a name. So it also certainly doesn't have a gender. I keep talking about male and female and mother and different thing like that. I'm applying human tropes to an eternal, infinite process, so that way we can kind of think about how it functions. But what I don't want is for us to get too caught up on those things and stop thinking about the functionality just because somebody had a bad experience with a certain gender of parent and now they can't identify that with something greater. So don't think like that. Just know the void is eternal. It is the original quantum superposition that continues to exist. It will always exist. It'll never be filled, because things, when they collapse into reality, they no longer appear to be in the void. We don't look around and, we don't look out the window and, if we put on a good enough telescope, we can see the edges of the void or something. It's just we're here and our physical reality exists within it, just like every other reality that ever does will exist within it. And so it's certainly not empty, but where you see it, or if you could see it, it would be black. It would be nothingness, because if something was there, it would be a collapsed position, not the superposition. So I hope that we're following thus far, because everything that I've said has been kind of a nod to a little bit of quantum physics, a little bit of Taoism, a little bit of the Singularity Codex, and I don't want to get different ideologies crisscrossed or anything. But I also want to make sure that I'm making a point from as many angles as effectively possible. So, in short, the void generates everything infinitely. Most things don't stick. The things that do stick, stick because certain laws of whatever the existence that it's going to have fall into place, and then they allow that kind of existence to exist within the confines of its quote unquote reality. Sorry, I keep saying that. It's just when I say the quote unquote thing, it's because I'm using a word that may not be perfect, but it's something that's the best that I can explain it as. So sorry if that gets annoying, but our reality is one of an infinite number of realities. So I guess you could say that the multiverse theory is true, although I wouldn't say that you should look at any specific one and say that's how it works. I'm not saying you should hear this little talk here and say that this is how it works. I do think that I'm probably closer to the truth on this than most sources would be, but that's only because I have had a very interesting life. I have both been put and put myself in circumstances that, when you combine them all together, they're pretty bizarre. And they certainly have given me a perspective on reality that I think works. So, if you guys have any questions about the void and how it works, and how a consciousness could arise from it, or anything like that, just ask me in the comments and I'll be more than happy to talk to you about them. Um, I might even, since the channel is brand new and I don't have a lot of subscribers yet, I might even be able to talk to you in some other way about it in a more personal level. So the void, it's everything that could ever be, and yet apparently nothing at the same time. But it's not nothing. That's the key here. And from it, the consciousness that I call the mother arises, and it sees and it feels everything within it. But because it is infinite and it cannot limit its infinity, it cannot personally act on anything, and it has to hope that people like us, that the beings that arise from the realities within it, can figure out the right way to live so that we're not all killing each other and insulting each other and doing terrible things that hurt the universe. Because we can't feel what the other person feels, but we can feel what we can feel, and that person can feel what they can feel. And the Great Mother feels everything that we all feel. And so it becomes so important to be kind to people, even if you don't like them. Don't do it for them, do it for her. Do it for the one that is everything, because it's worthwhile. And nobody can really know how it works entirely, but I do know that it matters to be good. It does matter. And do not think that because the void itself does nothing, that there aren't other forces in the universe that want to drag you down into a worse place. So don't let that happen. Be strong, be nice, be cool. You don't have to be a sterilized, monk. You can be yourself. In fact, the void, being infinite, wants everything to be everything it can be. It wants it to express its infinity within yourself. So be who you are in the most beautiful way possible, but don't let that fill you with egotism so that you become rude to people or condescending because you think you're a more beautiful aspect of the universe than they are. Even if it's true, it isn't how you should think. So hopefully, this has been a constructive talk about both the void, the mother, and kind of how realities collapse into existence. If you have questions on these things, like I said, comment or go online and research quantum physics, research superpositions, research wave particle duality, and you'll figure out that there is something to the words that I speak. I'm not pulling this, out of the air. And if I were, I'm pulling it out of the void. So I hope that you guys have a good day, and I look forward to uploading again soon. Bye bye.